Namaskar. I am Professor Ghazala Yasmin from the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Alia University, Kolkata. Today I welcome you all to the module that deals with women in and the media. And this is under the broad category Arts, Literature and Media, Gender and Representation. And after studying this module, you shall be able to understand the notion of gender as operational within the context of mass media. You would also be able to explore the representation of women in different strains of media like print, television, advertising and films. You'll be able to interrogate and question the functioning of mainstream mass media as a disjunct to the cause of gender equality, and you will be able to study the development of alternative media platforms as a space for mainstream women's issues and rights. The module is to comprehend gender sensitization and awareness in the media-centric parlance. It is also designed to analyze the framing of new media policies and frameworks in congruence with social justice and gender equality. Introduction. The concept of gender as it evolved in the early 1970s created a scope for discussion vis-a-vis natural biological differences between the male and the female as opposed to the socially engineered notion of gender based on an exaggerated sexual differentiation conforming to the existing patriarchal ideology. Gendered realities exist as a subset to socio-cultural practices and manifest themselves through a variety of structured institutional products of such societies. However, the emergence of gender as an academic and discursive tool is a relatively recent phenomenon. At one level, gender is a complex cluster of individual rights, identity and equality, and on the other, it is strongly rooted to positions of religion, caste, creed, community and the power structures operating within them based on specific political and cultural contexts. Now let us analyze the theoretical framework of feminist studies on media. Feminist studies on media focus on epistemological knowledge blended with psychoanalysis, social psychology as well as cultural studies to assess media's impact thereof to generate a theoretical insight. While feminist epistemology premise on a kind of a reverse observation differentiating between fact and value or prioritizing rationality over emotions, they believe that academic knowledge is dominated by androcentrism, camouflaged as the objective truth. They challenge and question the selection of words, the way of looking and seeing and the ways of representation triggered through gender stereotypes and patriarchal prejudices. The sustenance of the androcentric patriarchal order in human relations is presented as a scientific fact presenting a challenge to resolve the issues between various feminist epistemologies of various beliefs and values of who is to know, what is known and how can we know. While feminism and feminist empiricism is premised on the concept of a world out there in existence beyond human experience, it can be investigated and known. Thus, things which cannot be experienced directly is termed metaphysical and cannot be construed as a part of the scientific domain. Objective knowledge can be based on examining androcentric values and then removing them by returning to good science which is value-free. Feminist empiricism relies on suitable analysis of social phenomena, questioning the mingle of facts and value rather than the method of androcentric science. This theory, however, was heavily criticized by Sandra Harding in 1986, who questioned the concentration of feminist empiricism on the context of justification other than the context of discovery, raising the question of who knows as a core element of the feminist standpoint theory. Feminist postmodernism is based on postmodern, post-structural, critical theories which overlap and mingle considerably. In opposition to feminist empiricism and the feminist standpoint theory, which focuses on the identifiable objective reality outside human experience, Feminist postmodernists questioned the concept of universal reality and the ways to discover this universal reality. They shattered the universal experience of women argument as propounded by the standpoint theorists. Critics like Judith Butler questioned the way femininity or gender is considered a universal female experience. And there was a focus on the principles of diversity, plurality, and complexity in social science and gender-based analysis and research. There was also a discussion on the fluidity, fragmentation, and process of gender identities. Now let us look at media and social psychology. Social psychology, especially in relation to media, emerged in the 1980s. Alice Eagly in 1987 made an observation and experimented premised on the fact that people construct their own realities and social influence, which is all-pervasive, affecting the interaction of individuals. While human behavior is structured on social norms, men and women play structured social roles as formulated through gendered social institutions like family, education system, religious institutions, peer groups, as well as the media. These gender socialization contributors signal the appropriate or acceptable social role for women and men, as can be studied in advertisements that contain the clearest messages on gendered social roles via stereotypes to be delivered in minimum time with maximum effort. While advertising cannot essentially be categorized as a socialization medium, it certainly takes into account the gender of its character, the setting of the character in either the public or the private sphere, as well as the product category. And so we have exceeding images of women heavily outnumbering men set in a domestic sphere advertising beauty products or detergent powder, while men advertise non-domestic products like cars and drills in a public space. Now, let us study media and psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytical theory of conflict, like the Oedipal complex, as a framework for an infant's personality development and its consequence on the gender identity, forms the basis of feminist psychoanalytical approaches and gender, especially with regard to film studies. Laura Mulvey's seminal essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, draws from the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan and focuses on the concepts of a scopophilia or voyeurism and narcissism or ego libido with regard to films and the pleasures evoked thereof. Mulvey argues that films allow their characters to act as objects for scopophilia to be looked at or gazed at. Narcissism is the pleasure evoked in the viewer through looking, ideal egos, and personal identification. However, according to Mulvey, the pleasures via scopophilia and narcissism are reserved or available only for men as active subjects who look at women who are the passive objects being looked at. Men perform the role of protagonists while women remain objects of desire, not only for the male protagonists but also the male viewers who watch these films, who derive pleasure through their ego identification. The psychoanalytical theory, however, fails to answer questions on the creation of the male and the female as binary opposites, thus reconstructing and reinforcing the gender dichotomy instead of challenging and breaking it, thereby questioning the postmodern and feminist standpoint part of the feminist epistemology. The psychoanalysis theory also does not address the social structures which create the male gaze. It does not question why men look at women in a certain way or how patriarchy shapes the male gaze, thereby leaving an incomplete triangulation of media production, media content, and media's reception. Now let us come to the media and cultural studies. A complex interdisciplinary perspective, cultural studies has explored diverse power structures like race, class, and gender, and tried to forge its relationship with social and political movements. Stuart Hall's analysis of media in the light of cultural studies introduced a model of sense-making through the process of media's triangulation of production, content, and reception. Hall argues that media producers construct a message through a sign vehicle, encoding. When the process of media communication is completed, the message gets distributed amongst the audiences and is deconstructed or decoded. However, the process of encoding and decoding are mostly asymmetrical, being embedded in a social and a political and economic structure. Thus, the message becomes polysemic and assumes multiple meanings and interpretations. The readings of such a message may be either dominant, which is a full match of encoding, negotiated, where the reference code is acknowledged by the audiences but the object opposes certain elements of the encoded message, or oppositional, where the audience fits the encoded message into a completely different frame of knowledge. The strength of the mixed cultural studies approach to analyze media is its power to transcend the essentialist sex-gender dichotomy, where audiences, instead of being determined through their sex alone, are defined through gender, an important marker of their identity formations. This attributes a sense of agency to the audiences who construct their own gender identity and are also flexible about the fluid notions of gender. Now let us look at a historical overview of the entire media and feminist studies debate. As the question arises, why is it important to study the images of women and their portrayal as stereotypes in mass media? Well, through the course of gender studies, we have inferences that both masculinity and femininity are rather socially engineered cultural constructs functioning as a social reality. There is hardly any country, geographical area, clan or tribe where gender equality truly exists. In fact, most of the public spaces are a witness to extreme forms of gender hierarchies, gender hegemony and gender inequality. And to this the famous feminist slogan comes into play, the personal is the political. The slogan can concur to different meanings, the most universally acceptable one being that through the understanding of gender marginalization and discrimination in personal spaces like the family, we can move towards a better position to analyze gender bias in a public political sphere. The segregation of the public and the personal thus is unreal and a huge problematic as our personal beliefs, actions and affirmations have a larger political ramification through manifestations in the public sphere. For example, femininity is a social cultural construct formulated through institutions like the family, the education system, health services, the public to such a great extent that media operating within that society also accepts it. Thus, a case study in the evolution and transformation of images of women in mass media, if any, could contribute to change discriminatory patriarchal perceptions signified through stereotypes that women face on an everyday basis in society. During the early years of technological innovation and outreach, media as a tool for public discourse was produced, managed, controlled exclusively by men, with depiction of women tailored to suit men's choices and preferences. It was only during the 1960s when a feminist criticism of women's images in media emerged as an academic discipline. Betty Friedan, in her book The Feminist Mystique, slammed the media's creation of the image of an ideal woman as the happy housewife heroine. The problematic lies in media's association of femininity with the female sexual body politic as a dominant marker. Deliberate, fragmental objectification of a woman's body parts, exaggerated camera angles, hovering on sexual insinuations create an impediment to perceive a female body in its entirety while possessing intellect, sound mental faculties and an independent personality. Moreover, the portrayal of women's characters almost always succumbs to the generic, the beauty myth, white flawless skin tone, unreal and transformed slender body types through technical means, unscientific diet regimen and surgical invasions in the globalized scenario, cutting across cultural boundaries and geographical territories. The representation of women as per the existing media policy can be bifurcated into two categories of fictional and news reports based heavily on discriminatory stereotypes. While women in fiction and films constitute the household or sex objects, women in news lack roles and agency, often reduced to statistics. And let us perceive women in advertising now. As consumers of advertising are rooted in a specific culture, they become allied with its inherent value systems, the dominant beliefs and ideological perceptions. Quite naturally, the response to advertisements in congruence to their cultural beliefs is higher and more positive. And this explains the dominant strain of marginalization, sexualization, eroticization and fetishization of the women in advertisement space almost as a mirror to the entrenched patriarchal ideology of society. The domain of advertising depends on the ideology of the marketplace, including commercial competition, company expansion, product promotion, consumer appeal, and maximizing profit. It incorporates the tendency of media owners as well as media producers to strengthen the dominant patriarchal ideology and uphold the status quo of conservative values. Studies on the role and images of women in advertising reveal gross inequalities, underrepresentation, and misrepresentation, contributing to the creation of a biased and degraded value system in terms of gender equality and gender justice. More than 75% of women shown in advertisements lie in the young age bracket. Less than 6% of women in advertisements are located within a workplace, while a majority of them, being homemakers, are shown with the sole need of catering to the interests of their husbands, children, and family. The values and aspirations of almost all these women represented in advertisements is marriage and family centric. However, some of the most repulsive portrayals of women locates them in an unclear, unrealistic environment with their complete non-association with the product being sold, though their sexuality being used to the hilt to sell the unrelated product like a motorbike or a man's deodorant or inner apparel. The narration in most of the advertisements is through a male voice, and the female voice is either passive or lacking. Global trends of consumerism target young girls and women primarily as passive consumers quite inappropriately. And we now come to women in news. While media reiterates and perpetuates the conservationist view on women, their rights and concerns remain largely unarticulated and grossly neglected. Detailed studies of women representation in news pertains to crime stories of abduction, rape, eve-teasing, molestation, physical assault, domestic violence and murders, accidents and natural disasters, rather than news stories pertaining to a woman's professional acumen and expertise in business, politics or economics. While there has been a steady growth in women entering various professions, much of the television debates continue to feature men as experts in lopsided numbers. Moreover, even if taken into account, women's views are restricted to them being average citizens, while exemplary professional success stories are attributed to an overwhelming masculinity. News profiles of women politicians focus more on her physical attributes, her domestic negotiations, and her private life rather than her political views on contemporary issues. More often than not, sportswomen and female athletes find underrepresentation and limited news space, and representations, if any, are heavily steeped in gender stereotypes. If one critically examines the media images of female athletes, they may come across as hypersexualized postures, and greater emphasis on feminine physical beauty is a completely different picture as compared to their male counterparts. And when we look at women in films, Gaston Roberts says it best when he says that cinema is a great interpreter of the past and constantly programs the memories of its audiences. While performing the obvious functions of entertainment, films continue to be used to view and access history of the place from which they originate. They also create as well as reiterate and reinforce certain perceptions which society laps up almost subconsciously, hardly critiquing or questioning it most of the times. Cinema too has been a source of a suggestive compulsive discourse on gendered notions of society, both as image and reality, almost trapped in a homoerotic order that restricts women a choice in relation to their physicality, their body. A tacit alignment with socially sanctioned patriarchal norms perhaps strengthens the side for gender stereotypes, validating women's inferiority as real and natural. While notions of gender are deeply intertwined with purity, pollution, sexuality, and submissiveness, in case of a woman, they organize the masculine domain in categories of right or righteousness, powerful, heroic, and dominant. The gendered approach manifests itself in these films where a woman is sublimated through virginity or motherhood, blissfully submissive to patriarchal norms. Though films mirror how society treats women, these depictions are distortions of how women really are and what they really want. Women are insinuated in films as bearing the burden of sexual objectification that male roles cannot. Generalizations and assumptions from cult celluloid busters rank women either as damsels in distress, demented feminists, or belly-shaking bimbos attributed to an out-of-context item number with absolutely no thematic association to the rational plot of the film. Quite interestingly though, gender perceptions have been challenged and subverted in a number of few cinematic attempts throughout the history of Hindi cinema, and the trend seems to be gaining momentum as of late in lieu of feminist movements, postmodern liberalism, and global thought processes. And this is done through a nuanced juxtaposition of such films on women as opposed to the Bollywood staple of unidimensional gendered obsessions. Now let us look at women as journalists or media professionals. There exists a systemic symbolic annihilation, the result of consistent condemnation, deliberate trivialization, and a conspicuous absence of media support with regard to women's development as media professionals. Despite a definite increase in the number of women joining media as a profession, their ratio to the overwhelming presence of men in the field remains static, to say the least. While a heartening significant number of women journalists have made it big, both in television and print, the sensitive and inept reportage of women's issues like abuse and exploitation, gender bias and discrimination, health and professional issues still remain a huge challenge before them. A special case in point is the collective of the 8 rural women belonging to the backward community from the Bundelkhand area in Madhya Pradesh getting together to take out a community newspaper, Khabar Lahariya, with a focus on women's struggle to fight for their own rights. The concerns lie in women remaining hugely underrepresented or absent in top managerial positions and decision-making processes of media houses to be able to make a more adequate and wholesome representation of women's agenda by influencing new media policy of equal and fair representation. There also remains a large unfulfilled need for modern professional training of women journalists who would otherwise succumb to the conventional media rules entrenched in patriarchy and continue to reproduce sexist and stereotypical representative images of women. Since the 1960s, feminists have focused their action on media content and gender representation by arguing that it matters who makes it, where the who makes it is quite inevitably the men. Now let us come to post-structuralist feminism and digital democracy. In recent times, feminist activism has taken the route of new media and SNS platforms to highlight gender bias, sexual violence, and inequality. The increasing visibility of gender-based injustice experiences based on post-structuralist feminism cohabiting the digital mediascape has led to mass movements like the #MeToo campaign, connecting the dots with the online and the offline world. However, post-feminist scholars have identified 3 key constructions of digital media as tools for feminist practices: online feminism as precarious and as knowledge sharing, and feminism as doing something on or offline. However, there emerges a marked continuity between feminist practices in safe digital spaces as well as feminism in other historical and geographical locales, both in the local context as well as globally. We thus need to explore the complexions of feminism amongst teen feminists in the contemporary social moment, almost in the same way as the reach with girls themselves, usually informed in feminist debates about empowerment and sexualization, and exploring feminism from the perspectives of the girls can simply advance our knowledge theorization and understanding of evolving feminisms and their relationship to post-feminism. And now towards a feminist internet. Having contributed to the creation of a democratic and emancipated networked public system, the internet changes the dynamics from being passive information consumers to engaged, enthusiastic participants of the information creation process, thrilling and unprecedented sense of participation, reviving the notion of planetary citizenship, especially for those existing on the margins in the context of new media. The alternative social media platforms have enabled public to voice out their preferences en masse, resulting in the birth of some crucial social movements and campaigns through internet activism. Technology provides an opportunity to interrogate and expedite a change in gender norms. Concepts like internet democracy and feminist internet seek to actively relocate online norms to accommodate marginalized genders and enable them to negotiate the digital space with autonomy, agency, and a sense of dignity as well as a sense of belonging. The hashtag #MeToo movement has catapulted the digital space for the emergence of a norm-questioning and norm-changing behavior while also consolidating age-old norms in a newer way. It has also foregrounded individual strategies working collectively with socio-cultural, technological and regulatory mechanisms aided with movements, activism, advocacy and policy to support gender equality. They have been a definitive cultural shifting point for survivors of sexual abuse who have chosen the digital medium to dismantle daily misogyny, sexual coercions and discrimination. Very often, women who are techno-savvy and expressive on social media are targets for online violence as their online expressions threaten the patriarchal status quo and affect norms pertaining to bodily integrity, consent, autonomy, dignity and equality. Despite the vulnerability of the internet for technology-enabled gender violence, new forms of surveillance and censorship as well as the limited access of technology and online privacy for women as well as other gender minorities, the situation presents itself both as a crisis as well as an opportunity. Friends, we now come to the concluding part of the lecture. Well, to conclude with Deborah Grodin and Thomas R. Randolph, 1996, they emphasize that with a simple flip of the television channel or radio station or a turn of the newspaper or a magazine page, we have it at our disposal an enormous array of possible identity models. That is the overarching power of media on any society. In the recent scenario, the alternative media platforms, social media campaigns, citizen journalism, Mojo opportunities have reinvented feminist spaces where women are able to don the role of media producers rather than just being passive media consumers and mainstream their voices and concerns. However, these new opportunities bring with them their own sets of challenges of media misuse, fake news and biased perceptions as the new normative. It thus becomes pertinent to provide adequate media training and expertise to debunk fake viral news stories as well as develop gender-sensitive and gender-inclusive media policies. A strategic platform for action needs to be formulated in the sphere of the culture and public information to ensure gender equality in media and break the vicious circle of gender stereotyping. In 1995, the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women, Action for Equality, Development and Peace focused on the promotion of balanced, diverse and equal representation of women in media, as well as increased access and participation of women in top decision-making and media policy framing positions through the use of newer technologies of communication in consistence with the democratic right to equality and the freedom of expression. Researchers have concluded that when women are at the helm of affairs during media production, donning hats of scriptwriters, producers and directors behind the screen, the female characters on screen appear much more real, rounded and multidimensional. And these projections subvert the dominant gaze, giving women the agency to resist, challenge and reshape populist cultural norms, discourses and perceptions critical to social justice and gender equality. So friends, in today's module on women's media in this NRC on gender studies, we try to understand the notions of gender as operational within the context of mass media, We've tried to analyze the broad theoretical framework of feminist studies pertaining to the realm of media. We've also tried to explore the representation of women in different strains of media like print, television, advertising, and films. And we've tried to interrogate the question, the functioning of mainstream mass media as a disjunct to the cause of gender equality. We have also tried to study the development of alternative media platforms as a space for mainstreaming women's issues and rights, and to comprehend gender sensitization and awareness in the media-centric parlance. And finally, we tried to analyze the framing of new media policies and frameworks in congruence with social justice and gender equality. We covered a large area analyzing media through the lens of feminist studies. Hope it made sense to you? Well, research has an excitement of its own, and you will not understand its value till you experience it. So go ahead and start researching on something today. Try and use all the tips and suggestions that we've discussed today, and you will have a research report that you will be proud of. That's all that we have for today. Goodbye and take care. This is Ghazala Yasmeen from the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Alia University in Kolkata, saying goodbye.